4 years ago, I was about to get major surgery to replace a damaged joint in my titanium leg. It was a stressful time, but I was also excited, as Dark Deity, the first indie game that I had ever seen that was really shooting for that classic Fire Emblem style, had just released. I got it day one and fell in love despite the bugs, as did all of my buddies that I convinced to try the game, and it made it a whole lot easier to get through that challenging point in my life. So, imagine my surprise when after my surgery and my recovery, I learned that we were seemingly in a little bit of a minority in terms of positivity about the game. But now, 4-ish years later, Dark Deity 2 is here, and of course, so am I, to tell you that if you're one of those people who was majorly down on the first game, it's time to come back. This is my 100% story spoiler-free review for Dark Deity 2. Hello everyone, my name is Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman. If you enjoy what I do, including comprehensive day one reviews of strategy RPGs like Dark Deity 2, a like on this video and a subscription to the channel would be very much appreciated. Thank you so much. So what is the structure of this video going to be? Well, as mentioned at the top, this is going to be a comprehensive review that does not get into any specific story spoilers. That said, we'll be discussing mechanics, classes, some build examples, that kind of thing, as well as general story structure and theming. So, if there is a specific topic that you want to avoid, I have chapters set up, which you'll find at the bottom of the video, and timestamps on screen now. Feel free to jump around as you wish. We're going to be covering the overall premise of Dark Deity 2, its connections to the first game, the loose story setup, visuals, OST and sound effects, voiceover work, all the crazy mechanical innovations of the game, its replay value, and then we'll wrap up the whole thing with my thoughts and experiences having finished the game. If at any point during or after this review you would like to check the game out for yourself, I have left a link to its Steam page in the description. It is currently only on Steam for those wondering. It is also on sale for the first week of release to celebrate the launch, so if you're watching this early, get on it now. With that said, let's begin, shall we? Dark Deity 2 is set a few decades after the first title on a brand new continent, Varroa. The cast is almost entirely new, however the events of the first game have very much left their mark. Perhaps most notably, previous protagonist and hero Irving has grown up to become the new leader of the Order of Eternals, a sort of peacekeeping force that's independently aligned, and which seeks to maintain balance on the continent by uncovering plots and unearthing dangerous artifacts for safekeeping, you know, that kind of classic thing. Working towards that role are his children and our primary protagonists, Gwyn, Riordan, and Arthur, as well as a cast of allies, friends, and family members like returning character Alden. Alden, like Irving, has grown from a child soldier into a storied but kind of haunted archmage, as well as a mentor to the main trio. Note as well, I say haunted here, but he's not like literally haunted. I know that's something that obviously could happen in a fantasy game like this. Although there is some of his dialogue which does imply some pretty shady stuff has happened to him in the last 20 years, so maybe I've got a little bit of foresight on that one. We'll have to see. You'll get what I mean once you play the game. The team's current mission involves keeping an eye on the expansionist Asvarelian Empire, and the scent of war is absolutely on the air. As the game progresses, you'll be taking down a linear series of 30 chapters, including some optional training and challenge missions, recruiting new party members, learning more about their backstories, as well as the events of the land, maybe seeing some returning faces, and overall getting more of a feel for how the events of the first game impacted the world and everyone in it. Now note, if you didn't play or didn't finish Dark Deity 1, no worries. You're fine. You can go straight into DD 2 without any issue. The team very clearly set the game up to be very new player friendly in terms of connections to the first game, but if you, like me, did play the first game and really enjoyed it, I think you'll find yourself smiling in excitement plenty of times throughout the game. I won't spoil for what, but just, you'll know it when you see it. Speaking of story and characters, I do want to discuss this first, as it was definitely one of the more heavily criticized aspects of Dark Deity 1. Now, while I enjoyed these aspects myself, it is kind of unquestionable that they were the weakest parts of the game. I think it's a pretty safe statement to make, but that makes it all the more impressive that Dark Deity 2 pulled a complete 180, delivering not only a cast of compelling, memorable characters, but a much more well-rounded and deep story of politics, familial strain, the burdens of leadership and the responsibilities that come along with it, victory and loss, while still wrapping it in a setting of swords and sorcery that we all love and which can be kind of hard to get right, especially for a smaller project like this. And really, I promise you that I'm not exaggerating when I say this. I legitimately cried no less than 3 times while playing Dark Deity 2 and laughed out loud far more often. Every character feels incredibly distinct and driven in their own ways, especially the main cast, and nearly every single one continues to develop and grow in a way that many other games in the genre have kind of moved away from in recent years. You know, those titles that have been criticized quite heavily for creating one-note character after one-note character with like 1 or 2 quirks that their whole personality revolves around, if those quirks aren't just their personality, period. Dark Deity 2 puts way more attention in developing its cast as people, both in the story and in their Bond conversations, and I was very, very happy to see that. It was very refreshing to experience. Of course, beyond just our playable characters, who are definitely phenomenal, the rest of the cast is great too. From returning characters with new roles in development, to a surprisingly large cast of supporting characters who also all have their own clear motivations and personality traits, to hell, like random generic NPC soldiers, to, of course, our villains. Everyone feels like they have a place, everyone feels like they belong, and for the villains in particular, this is massively important. You know, again, going back to Dark Deity 1 and comparing to many other strategy RPGs as well, here's looking at you, Engage, our villains actually feel like they have reasons behind their actions. We don't necessarily get the full picture for everyone, there's definitely some sequel hook stuff in here, but, I mean, we're talking themes of loss and inadequacy, the desire to secure a legacy, to earn back something that you feel is rightfully yours, even if no one else agrees with that idea, or yeah, even just a simple drive for power. And yet these ideas still feel fully fleshed out for our antagonists. And we're not looking at mustache-twirling villains doing hilariously evil things for no other reason than to give us a reason to fight them. And that's in large part because these characters are actually given a chance to breathe and develop. And not only does that make them much more compelling, it also makes it so much more satisfying when you finally do get the chance to confront them. Hell, I mean, let's talk for a second about characters who aren't even directly opposed to us, but who still question the actions of the party and the Order. Their questions actually feel appropriate to ask, even if we as the player know that they are in the wrong. It lends a very realistic bent to the events of the game as they unfold, with pushback and inquisitive questions and sort of undermining of our authority, driving your desire to push forward even more. There's a couple of scenes in particular that I can think of where I really felt the strain in the room as very serious questions and allegations were being thrown back and forth between our party and our side and other major powers on the continent. And that was not something that I was really necessarily expecting, but it makes it all the more impressive. Really, while there were some moments of development for opposing forces in DD1, here, you just get far more scenes with our antagonists, from line troops to emperors, and oftentimes without any of our characters being involved. And it not only deepens the world, but also really makes you kind of give a shit about events as they happen. You know, add on to this the fact that you can make story choices that actually are reflected in-game further down the line, not in a way that's going to lead to like branching endings or anything, but can very much have an impact on how some chapters progress and what characters are present for them. And I really feel like players are going to be very engaged with Dark Deity 2's story, because I certainly was. And of course, that's before we even get into the stellar voice performance. Speaking of...
Your luck ran out. No more adventures. Then the digging began. Did you dig my grave yourself, I wonder?
And I get it. I'm not the hero they are. I'll never be like my dad, and that's fine. But I love them. I'm honored to be their brother.
Secure a safe route for the Baron and his house. Tell them the Lords of Gratania sent you. And, be sure to mention my name. Yes?
Okay. No, like, seriously, this is a big one. This is a phenomenal one, actually. The entire main script of Dark Deity 2 is voiced. Every single line. I cannot emphasize enough how much of an impact this has on selling this story and this world. You know, I've gone on record before as saying that games like Fire Emblem don't, quote-unquote, need voice acting to be a complete package. And that's a stance that I still stand by, because the writing and the mechanics oftentimes speak for themselves. This opinion is also largely due to the fact that poorly handled VO work and integration of it can really massively detract from any experience, but especially a sort of tactical experience like this. But on the flip side, when you have a great cast that's been directed very well, the opposite is also very, very true, and a project can be elevated massively. And that's exactly what we're seeing here. Like, seriously, this voice cast is insane. Like, I know I'm really kind of gushing here, but listen, I'm just going to rattle off some character names and sprites where I can find them, so y'all really get the impact of this. We're talking voice work from anime and video games here, right? Okay, just rapid fire. Rosaria, Dorothea, Aramis, Fern, Ainz, Benji, Genist, Zeno. These are just some of the characters you may know, whose VAs have major roles in this game, and you can feel it. Every line, every command to charge, every anguished cry of loss hits, and they hit hard. I can't get into some of the specifics that really shine, again, due to spoilers, but even just from what I've shown here, and I'll sprinkle some stuff in as we go, I imagine you get the point.
The Empire has picked a fight they can never win! And tonight, we show them just how big a mistake that was! Alden, time to smoke them out.
Aye, aye, Commander.
Varroa, join your blades with mine, and charge!
There are some truly seminal performances here, and I don't believe it's hyperbole to say that. It might sound silly to say that some of these artists have had their best showing of their careers in what is a relatively small indie title, but man, I think they have. Like Gwyn, Riordan, Arthur, Irving, Saxon, Valeria, even side characters like Aaron are incredible. There's honestly, like, not much else I can say because I'm just going to keep gushing, but I was moved to tears for a reason, right? It is a bit of a shame. Unfortunately, the Bond lines aren't voiced, but I will admit, I can't be critical of that either. This script and the amount of voice dialogue is already massive for an indie project of this size, so I would not be surprised if it was just out of scope to try and do all the Bond lines as well. It certainly didn't detract from the main offering for me, and I imagine it'll probably be the same for you, even if it would have been nice to have, you know? Moving on to visuals, and I think one aspect of Dark Deity 1 that was generally fairly universally praised was the quality of the character portraits and the combat animations. And fortunately, that legacy has only progressed. Every single character portrait is more detailed and impressive than anything I can think of from DD1. Regardless of whether you're looking at brand new characters such as Gwyn or Cassandra, or returning cast like Alden and Irving, every portrait feels like a direct progression from the first title. Characters run the gamut of origins and inspirations, from heavily armored knights to elven shamans to basic, if stylish, civilians, or even archmages and foreign leaders, yet every single one fits in the world and matches not just the style of DD2, but also wouldn't feel out of place in DD1. You know, and I imagine, of course, this is partially due to the fact that the game's artists have been consistent from the first game to the second, but there's also just a clear direction at play here that has lent cohesion to a title that could have easily felt disjointed. Then, of course, there's all the combat and skill animations. This is perhaps the most obvious draw of the game, but the variation and energy of every class's animations is seriously impressive. Every attack, every crit, every class, and every skill is unique and lively. From heavy-hitting greatsword attacks to a little bit of a saucy point and then slash with a sword for a crit animation, flashy flips and spins, like, all of these weapon animations are impressive. And I will say there are a few that didn't quite line up with what I was looking for, but that's not to say that they were poorly done or lacked impact either. That was just my own personal expectation. You know, I'm thinking of, for Reaper's crit, how much I was really hoping that it would be like an Elden Ring style, like, backstab, where you, like, put them against the edge of the blade and but oh well, next time. And of course, all the same quality has been applied to the spells of DD2 as well. As for me, spell animations were pretty much my favorite attacks universally in Dark DD1, and man, they have been cranked up a notch here. And we're talking earthbending, bursts of green hell flame, prismatic energy sprays, falling stars, and my personal favorite, covering yourself in mage armor and summoning a big-ass magic sword to beat people with. God, I love a good spell sword class. And that's just the first set of promotions, so you know things are only going to get crazier in Tier 3. For example, did we, someone order some necromancy, perhaps? It was me. I always order the necromancy. Of course, the last aspect of DD2's visuals as well that I want to point out, though, is the visual design of maps, menus, and the user interface, because this is a very important one. While the animations and portraits of the first game were very strong, these other aspects were less so. They got the job done, but they definitely felt rough. Not anymore. Maps are varied, with lots of different details and assets to make them pop that also don't make them too busy to be able to read. Menus and the UI are very ornate and intricate, fancy, almost like a Victorian picture frame in design sometimes, but also much easier to look at and navigate than the original game's menus. And of course, the combat window evokes that classic Fire Emblem style that we all love. Yeah, I will say, I will miss the creativity of the whole health potion HP indicators from Dark Deity 1, especially the variety and how they would be destroyed in different ways based on what damage type did the deed, but I mean, these new designs are so clean and so clear and so classic. I can't complain. Now, moving from the very important visual design, it is also very much important that we talk about the original soundtrack and the SFX, because people might not realize how much of an impact this can have on your experience of the game, but it is very, very important. And while, yes, this is a little bit more of a subtle change, it is still one that has a lot of improvements from the first game. You know, sound balancing in general across the board in DD2 definitely feels better than in DD1. I'm always reminded of the infamously deafeningly loud hammer bonk on the game's launch back in the day, and really the sheer variety and quality of SFX has increased as well. I'm a particular fan of Arthur's personal skill Lunar Reeve and its almost like machine gun sounding nature.
Be gone!
As well as the suitably menacing buzz of the Necromancer teleporting around during its animations. It immediately put a smile on my face when I first heard it for the first time. The game just sounds better in action in general, and that's helped by the fact that the OST is certainly no slouch either. One of the first things I noticed in the demo was the banger map music, and I'm happy to say that the full title does not disappoint in that regard either. That said, there are a few times where I felt a little bit of a mismatch between the gravity of like a battle or a scene, the relatively like upbeat music that was happening, but I mean, that's one of those things that I imagine could be easily swapped post-release, and it's not like it took me out of the scene or anything, it just felt a little weird. I can absolutely see this OST, though, being one that I remember fondly, and I will be very happy to hear each time I replay the game. Again, it happened just from when I played the demo to when I got to play the full release, and I was already like, oh, I love this music, I'm so happy to have it back, so that's a good sign. All right, moving on from the more, shall we say, artsy-fartsy stuff of the game, which is, of course, obviously very important, and I say that in jest. We now need to talk about the real meat and potatoes, right? This is the mechanics, and this is a huge one. Dark Deity 2 has been reworked, top to bottom, with completely different mechanics for character progression, damage types, unit skills, personal skills, weapon upgrades, etc., etc. There's nearly nothing here from Dark Deity 1, other than the obvious basics of like turn-based strategy RPGs, growth rates, and player-enemy phase. Was the notable fact, actually, still carried over from the first game, that crits only deal 2 times damage, not 3 times, like Fire Emblem and a lot of other games in the genre. So we're just going to go through, in no particular order to this, we're just going to rapid fire through some of the important stuff. Every class now has one weapon type that it uses. Weapons are now found as drops and loot, treasure bought from the shop, all the classic type stuff you would expect. And each weapon does have its own stat spread, as well as their own pool of runes you can equip to them to give them new skills and stat spreads. There's no breakable weapons here, there's no durability, anything like that. Each weapon is just its own unique trait, and it's definitely going to be important that you upgrade them and find the appropriate weapon for a class as you proceed through the game. However, notably, there's no more different damage types beyond physical and magical, depending on like what weapon type you're using or what class you're using. It's just your physical attacks or your magical attacks, and the same thing can be said for your defense stats, standard physical and magical defense stat. You can also craft rings now, many of which have very similar effects to the aspects of DD1 if you're familiar with the first game, and each character can be equipped with 2 rings at a time. These rings will absolutely impact your build crafting, especially some of the later game ones, that you can dramatically change the role of a character. And it happened to me a lot when I would choose to use one and was like, wait, I have a whole new build that I can do now using just this ring, and that's really cool. Your class skills now use mana, and by the end game, every character will have 5 different skills that they can use. 1 personal active ability that is unique to them, and 4 that come from their class progression. These could be anything from damaging map attacks that can't be countered to additional attack damage or boosted effects or status effects on your normal attacks, movement abilities, healing and support skills, etc., etc. On top of that, each character also has their own passive skill that is usually quite powerful and again, unique to them, and will absolutely guide how you promote them. And on top of that, Each class also has its own passive skill, all of which can stack together and combine into all sorts of wacky combinations by the end of the game. Speaking of promotions, classes and promotions are almost entirely new and reworked, although a few fan-favorite classes are still here. Now, as you level, you'll reach level thresholds where you can then use a specific item to promote to new class tiers. It's not something that happens automatically like it did in DD1. For Tier 2 classes, you have to get to level 5 very early on, and then for Tier 3, level 25, much further down the road, but it gives you room to kind of experiment and play around with stuff. Each time you promote, you'll keep the skills from your previous class or previous tier of classes while acquiring new ones, and once you've reached these thresholds and promoted, you can then swap between classes at will so long as you have the relevant items. So you're not going to be able to like stack all of the abilities on top of each other. You'll just keep whatever ones are relevant to the classes that you're currently in, but it's not like you're locked into using one class, so you can kind of move around freely, and the game gives you plenty of different promotion items you can swap around if you aren't happy with a class that you picked for a character right off the bat. This does, of course, mean that you have a heavy amount of potential for customization, and it enables you to decide what promotion path gets you the optimal loadout of skills you want for any given character. Of course, every class skill does have a use. There are some that are more niche than others, I will say, but that's fine. That's how it should be, I would imagine. And there's really enough variety here to make two characters of the same general role still feel very different to use. We'll give some examples at the end here. Notably as well, enemies do not have access to these same classes and skills, instead relying on raw stats to threaten your party. There are some elite enemies that will have their own modifiers, such as the ability to inflict bleed stacks on you, which we'll talk about in a second, but nothing so advanced as your own tools are. What's nice is that many of the enemy classes are actually the old classes from DD1, which is fun as a series veteran, and of course bosses will often have their own unique classes, skills, animations, and passives to keep them scary and definitely make them threatening, especially on higher difficulties. As mentioned, we do also have status effects in the game now, and they are actually a fairly major part of the combat sandbox. You have effects like bleed, poison, blind, snare, all that type of stuff, and they're used to great effect by both you and the enemy. Really, a lot of classes and skills focus on the application and removal of status effects, and they feel genuinely powerful, which I really appreciate. You know, like that whole thing where there's nothing worse than seeing a bunch of status effects in like some JRPG or something, and it's always a situation where they're either just feel too weak to be of use compared to raw damage output, or they're strong, but because they're strong, you're not allowed to use them on bosses, that type of nonsense. It's not the case here, and I honestly love it. It just adds a little bit of depth that is sorely needed sometimes. Now, as I said, I wanted to give a little bit of an example of just what build crafting kind of looks like in this game, and to do that, we're going to feature two of my favorite characters in my favorite class, the Necromancer. These two characters were both Necromancers by the end of my initial run, although they took different paths to get there. The first, Arthur, was focused entirely on dealing direct damage with abilities, while occasionally being able to poison enemy squads and summon zombies for support. He was incredibly squishy, and he did not much like being in direct combat, but with his kit, he almost never actually had to be. He could just stand in the back, generating extra mana because of his passive skills, and tossing around Hellfires and Lunar Reaves from tiles away, stacking power over the course of the map, and pretty much deleting anything that he looked at by turn 5 or 6. Compare that to my second Necromancer, Kalith, who served as far more of a debuffing support piece who could also be a bit of an off-tank when I needed her to be. She would run in, blind a big group of enemies with her personal skill, then get defensive buffs from her passive skill and some rings I gave her. This would then allow her to face tank the group on the enemy phase, generally just to weaken them. She wouldn't really kill a whole lot. But she was also then equipped with healing magic and a teleport, so that when it would come back around to my turn again, she could back up, maybe summon an ally to her to take advantage of the weakened enemies, or toss a heal on someone if they needed it. She was just very versatile, a nice tech piece for my army, who often led the Vanguard, which was really cool for what you would think would be kind of like a squishy mage class, right? And again, like these are two characters of the same end class, who still held wildly different roles, and I can still think of like 3 other ways that I could have built either of them. Absolutely wild stuff. Of course, when we're discussing mechanics, character building, while a huge part of DD2's innovations, is not the only facet of these new mechanics. For example, the wound system of DD1 has been reworked, so now rather than losing a character on a map and them taking a permanent stat debuff, they'll have a negative status applied to them for the next map only. This can be anything as simple as a temporary stat debuff, or maybe as involved as spawning with massive bleed stacks you have to deal with for a few turns, or just straight up crippling them for a little while by making it so they can't dodge or crit. It's a system that still feels punishing, which is something that's sorely needed in a game that doesn't have permadeath, in my opinion, without literally crippling a character forever if you lose them a few times and taking them out of your campaign, right? And considering the reduced size of the roster in DD2, I think this is a great balance. Bonds have also had a rewards track added to them, kind of your support system if you're thinking of it in Fire Emblem terms, which gives you a bit more incentive to pursue them outside of character development, which is also very strong, keep in mind. And these grant gold and crafting materials, upgrade materials, basic stuff, but useful stuff. As mentioned previously, there's training missions that you can repeat for a small price if you're stuck or want to experiment with builds before the next map, and there's special challenge missions with their own limiters and conditions like reduced roster sizes, but which grant you powerful weapons when you can clear them, so just some fun stuff to break up the mission flow. Speaking of which, each mission does have some twist or trick to keep it interesting without falling directly into gimmick map territory, which I really appreciate. All of your abilities can be upgraded with a variety of different mana cost reductions, power boosts, range increases. There's just so much juice to squeeze from this game, and that's just in one run. It's kind of nuts. But of course, I do hear you all out there in the audience. But Tom, is one run all that I'll get from Dark Deity 2? No, my friend. I don't think it is, and let's talk about that. Of course, as any long-standing strategy RPG fan will tell you, they've replayed some of their favorites in the genre many, many times. See me and Final Fantasy Tactics, for example. Having ways to keep things fresh and interesting from one run to another is a major facet of that drive, and it's something that I feel the team at Sword and Axe have always been pretty good about. Even back in DD1, the different class trees you could follow, difficulties you could try, and campaign modifiers like reverse recruitment, for example, that you could apply to a new run, gave you a ton of ways to play. That's also true in DD2 as well. Like right off the bat, you have 4 difficulties available to you: Mortal, Hero, Deity, and Demonic. Deity is where I started. It's basically like the hard mode, and I intend to take on the very punishing Demonic soon, which would be more equivalent to like your lunatic modes or your maddening modes, right? For me, that's a guaranteed 2 playthroughs right there, to say nothing of the different ways you can build your army as we've previously discussed. But then, we also still have campaign modifiers, random recruits, tweaking player and enemy base stats and growths. You want a 0 XP mode? You got it. 0 gold income mode? That too. Random enemy classes, every enemy is empowered. There's a bunch of different options available to you right off the bat. And if past experience is anything to go by, I would not be surprised if some fan-requested modes were added to the game post-release as well. Because like Sword and Axe clearly know the FE ROM hacking scene quite well, and have added a lot of the favorite modifiers from that scene into this full release, and it's awesome. As far as my personal experience with the game is concerned, I mean, it should be painfully obvious by this point that I'm in love with Dark Deity 2. Like, I blitzed the game over the course of a week so I could get this review out for release, and at no point did I ever get tired of it or crave something different. There was always a new system to explore, a new build to try, compelling story moments that push me into that just one more level mindset that I've found it's harder and harder to achieve as I get older. It's just, like, as someone who has grown up with this genre from the old days, when it was one of the more niche things out there in gaming, and we had to rely on janky fan hacks and translations of games that hadn't been released in the West, it's obvious to me, as someone from that time, that the Dark Deity 2 team is the exact same type of people. Not only that, but the team obviously learned an incredible amount from the production and release of Dark Deity 1, and all of that experience has been applied with force and passion to this new project, and you can feel it leaking out of the game's pores. Now, of course, I acknowledge power of recency bias on the way we view things at large. I get that. But still, knowing how the first game has stuck with me through the years despite its flaws, I really think this is going to be an all-timer for me. I ran into a couple of bugs, should be fixed by release. There were a couple of times when the music didn't quite line up right for my tastes, and there were a couple of characters and story moments that didn't quite resonate with me. But that's to be expected in any art form or anything where you're telling a story, and these are the most minor of complaints in the face of what Sword and Axe has achieved with Dark Deity 2. If you have ever enjoyed and trusted my coverage of a game, be it Unicorn Overlord, or Fire Emblem Engage, or Tactics Ogre Reborn, or any other title we've done on this channel, trust me when I say this one deserves your attention. It isn't perfect. It may not be your preferred style of strategy RPG, but it knows the soul of our genre, and it embraces it in every way that I can think of. It made me feel again the way that I felt when I first played Fire Emblem the Sacred Stones in a Target gaming department when I was 13 years old, back when you still could play demos of games in department stores. Now, 2 decades later, I've had the honor of playing a game that makes me love this genre in the same way all over again, and that is not a gift that I ever expected to receive at this point in my life, and I appreciate it massively. Huge props to the team at Sword and Axe. Massive congratulations to all of you for overcoming the trials and tribulations of the release of Dark Deity 1, pushing forward, refining your skills, and making something that feels like it is absolutely going to push you forward into greater and greater heights. You've done incredible work here, and I, for one, will absolutely be telling anyone and everyone that this is a game that they must play. Thank you all so much for watching. I was incredibly hyped for Dark Deity 2 just off of the back of my love for the first game, but I still wasn't prepared for what this game contained. If you enjoy your time with it anywhere near as much as I did, I highly encourage you to leave a review of the game on Steam. I only recently learned just how important of a metric good reviews are for any release on Steam, especially within the first few weeks of release, and any support that we can give the fine folks at Sword and Axe, the better. I really do get the feeling that they're just getting started, and I'm extremely excited to see what they put out in the future. I think we truly have a great developer of strategy RPGs on our hands here, and if we can help nurture them into a truly huge, successful studio, I would be ecstatic. With that said, though, and until the next time, my name has, of course, been Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman. I hope you all have a good night. Stay safe and healthy out there. And remember, be good to each other, everybody. Bye now.